Well, hello and welcome back to the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint live series. My name is Guy Stevens. I'm the host, also the executive director here at the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. Really excited to have you here with us today. And if you're not familiar with the Alliance, I'll tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do. Started the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint almost 5 years ago now. It's hard to believe time is moving quickly. And the Alliance was really started to initially raise awareness about the use of restraint and seclusion, but our mission continues to kind of evolve. It's not just about restraint and seclusion. It's restraint, seclusion, suspension, expulsion, corporal punishment. Even beyond that, it's really about all the things that are often being done to kids, very often in the name of behavior. And we are really dedicated to changing hearts, minds, policies, and laws, and trying to create a better environment, not just for kids, but also for teachers and staff. And of course, that means that we've got a lot of work ahead of us, but we've been doing a lot of work in many different areas to try to really accomplish some of those goals. You know, we want to see a curving of the school to prison pipeline and ultimately see safer schools for everyone. So I'm excited to have our guest with us today, Susan Driscoll from the Crisis Prevention Institute. And you might be wondering, the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint and Crisis Prevention Institute. And let me tell you, we've got a great conversation in store for you today. And I think a great story about how we can collaborate and bring about change. So I'll be introducing Susan in just a moment here, but I do want to take care of a couple of housekeeping items first. First of all, as always, this is being recorded. So we record these, we do them live, we record them. They are later available on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and generally in a few days, we make them available as an audio-only podcast. So if you want to listen on Apple Music or you want to listen on Spotify, you can go and download the podcast as well. And of course, if you are watching on YouTube, please be sure to subscribe. We're trying to get our subscribers up on YouTube. So with that, before I introduce the guest, I do want to let you know we've got a couple of sponsors that are helping us to bring the podcast to you. And that has been extremely helpful because it helps us to make sure that we're able to do this. I say every other week, that was our norm. We've been doing weekly shows recently, but it really helps that we've got some great sponsors who are helping us do this work. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to our first sponsor today, which is Supportable Solutions. You have met Connie Persick, who has been on the show a couple of times. And Connie, of course, runs Supportable Solutions, which is doing some amazing work. Let me pull up here the ad and tell you.
Behaviors are signals to the deeper whys. The Why Toolkit, a tool built for and approved by teachers, parents, and administrators that can both assess and support individuals struggling with behaviors. Connie has created a document that turns typical behavioral documents upside down and replaces them with a deep dive into what really matters: how to support each child within a compassionate and relational framework based on their individual differences. The Why Toolkit was found to decrease seclusion and restraint by 21% in a year-long pilot study.
And Connie does some amazing work. Supportable Solutions, a great organization. They do coaching. They do so much more. And I actually had the pleasure of collaborating with Connie. In fact, it's very related to what we're going to be talking about today because Connie is a very important collaborator on the work that we're actually doing with Crisis Prevention Institute. And so I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk a little bit more about that as well. We've got one other sponsor I want to introduce you to, a brand new sponsor for us, Blue Jack Kids. And I'm going to share a little bit about what Blue Jack Kids does and who they are.
Are you looking for a trauma-informed social-emotional learning program? Look no further. Blue Jack Kids has created an amazing collection of SEL videos with ready-to-use lesson plans and activity worksheets. The Trauma-Informed Educators Network had a chance to review the content, and this is what they said. We love that Blue Jack Kids incorporates neuroscience to help students understand their brains and emotions. The videos are so well done with a clear focus on diversity, belonging, and inclusion. Video collections are appropriate for elementary ages. If you want to get started, go to bluejackkids.com and you can use the code SEL10 for a 10% discount on a year subscription. Check them out.
And a huge thank you to both Supportable Solutions and Blue Jack Kids. It really helps us to do the work that we're trying to do here and bring great programs like this to you. So before I bring up our guest and do the introduction, I do want to just give a quick shout out to everyone who has already joined us live. If you are watching us live in the chat, you know what to do. We do this every time. In the chat, tell us who you are and where you're from. It's always great to see where people are joining us from today. And I see that Ginger has been here before and she knows how it works. Ginger has already said, made a comment here about Connie's work. And Ginger actually has a new book that just came out too, which is really exciting. So let me go ahead and bring up our special guest today. And I'm going to read an introduction here. Susan, it's great to have you here. Susan Driscoll is the president of the Crisis Prevention Institute and oversees the development of all products and programs, the trainers who deliver them, and for the support and care of the clients who use them. She joined CPI in 2017 and is based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And in 2022 was named a director of the company. Prior to joining CPI, Susan served as a president and CEO of Wolters, I'm going to get this wrong here, but I'll try my best, Kluwer Health Professional Education, where she transformed the business from a traditional book publisher to a subscription-based healthcare content business. She has extensive experience in both healthcare and higher education publishing and training. Susan has startup experience prior, and I would have never guessed that, right? I mean, we're doing startup things in our collaboration together, which is really fun. Susan has startup experience prior to joining Wolters Kluwer. Susan was the CEO of iUniverse, an internet-based provider of self-publishing services that was funded by Barnes & Noble and Warburg Pincus. Her expertise is broad. In addition to her CEO experience, Susan has served as VP of Operations, VP of Strategy, VP of Marketing, and VP of Product and Technology. She has direct experience in global markets, including India and China. Susan was named one of the top 50 women in publishing in 2009 and served on the executive board of the Association of American Publishers. Currently, she serves on the board of ISA, the Association of Learning Providers, and is a trustee on the School of the Holy Child in Rye, New York. Susan's a graduate of the University of Notre Dame and currently serves as the chair of the advisory council for the Murray Museum of Art in Notre Dame. So Susan, thank you so much for joining us today. Of course, I know a lot more about you now. So I had this bio, and I probably could have just started with, and she likes Brussels sprouts because, whole story behind that, right? But I've gotten a chance to know you. And of course, it's really, I think, an interesting story behind, one, how we became connected, and two, some of the work that we're actually doing together now. And I'm actually eager to share some of that story. And I'm very eager to talk about the work that we're doing together on a brand new program called Reframing Behavior, which we've been working very hard on for almost a year and a half now, and is beginning to reach the time when it's gonna be out and available. So we've got a lot in store today, but let me just start by saying welcome. Really glad to have you here today.
It's really great to be here. I feel like when I first became aware of you, it was through this podcast, and I started to watch the podcast. You'll probably tell more of the story, but I started to watch these podcasts and was so impressed with the quality of your guests and what a nice guy you were. This guy named
now you know better,
nice guy. I feel like it's a dream come true to actually be on this podcast with you and to be working with you. So great to be here.
I appreciate that. And we already have a number of people who have joined on live. I've got Angie from Maryland, who is also a volunteer here with the Alliance. Cassie from End Seclusion and Restraint, Michigan and New Jersey, who's doing some amazing work there in Michigan as well. And it looks like Connie has joined us as well from Wisconsin. We'll probably be talking a little bit more about Connie as we go through our discussion today. So I want to begin by talking a little bit about kind of the how and the why and the what. When I first, my first experience, I think, as you know, with CPI or Crisis Prevention Institute was my son. My son was being restrained and secluded in our school district, and the training that was being used there was CPI. And turns out that, I had a lot of questions, and I eventually contacted CPI and began to ask some of those questions and began to get answers to those questions. But my very first experience kind of with CPI was as a parent of a child that had been physically restrained and secluded. And I was concerned. I was concerned about, like, what is this training and what's it doing? And, it turns out that, what I later found out was that, unfortunately, much of what our school system was doing was not really aligned with what the training said. Which is an experience I've seen repeated now over and over again. But that was my first experience with CPI. And it wasn't until sometime later that I had another kind of connection point. And it's interesting. And you and I were talking about this before we came on, but I told you that I went back to my archive and I pulled up the very first email I got from you, which, despite my memory of putting it in the fall, actually happened in February of 2021. And you had sent an email actually through our website and introduced yourself. And you said, "I'm the president of Crisis Prevention Institute, and I'm very impressed with the work that you're doing. We are focused on reducing and ultimately eliminating restraint and seclusion, and also in helping people with a duty to care to better understand the connection between brain and behavior. Hoping we could schedule a call so that I can better understand how CPI could support your efforts and/or dispel any misconceptions you might have about our approach. Hoping to hear from you." So I received that email one day, and my first response was, "Uh-oh." My first response was, CPI is reaching out to me. What have I said? Am I in trouble here? So, but my first response wasn't necessarily, it was kind of like, what does the president of CPI want with me? And I wasn't sure where that conversation would go. But we ended up from that email scheduling a call. And do you remember that call?
I do remember the call. I remember the journey
Yeah.
of that first year, because you had to be the hardest date I ever got. Honestly, it took a long time of conversations back and forth for you to believe that I was actually being honest, that we did want to eliminate restraint in schools. And I remember you saying, why would a company like CPI eliminate restraint? That would put you out of business. And I kept trying to say, no, that's not what we're about. We would be delighted and we'd still have a thriving business if there was never any need for restraint. But it took a long time and a lot of conversations to convince you of that.
So I was a little skeptical. That's what I'm hearing you say. Well, I remember that first conversation. Of course, I went into that a little concerned, but what I remember is having a little bit of an opportunity to share with you a little bit about what we were doing. And I think I shared with you some of the concerns that I had as well, kind of more broadly around training, not necessarily related to CPI. But the experience that I had both as a parent and as an advocate, which led me to have a lot of concern around what we were seeing actually happen, and what I think was the probably most significant outcome of that meeting that we had is at the end of that conversation, you said, "Hey, if you're interested in taking the training, we can make that happen." And of course, my response was, well, yes, I'm an advocate of course, it makes sense for me to see. And, I had in the time prior to that participated in other training, because I felt it was really important to have a good sense of what I was talking about. And the best way to do that is to kind of have that experience. So our journey from there actually went to an invitation to attend training. And I actually did kind of the full Train the Trainer program in Baltimore. I think it was a blended. I think I did a day first online and then went to Baltimore and did the training. And after I did that training, of course, I went there, and that was a journey for me because, as an advocate and as a father of a son who had been traumatized by physical restraint and seclusion, just even going to the training that these kinds of physical skills were being taught was a challenge. But I think as I'd done some real work to try to kind of separate my my feelings and my trauma from how can we do something to bring about change. And I remember sitting in that training and having lots of thoughts and lots of ideas. And after that training, I remember kind of connecting with you and say, hey, I did the training. If you're interested, I'm happy to share with you kind of my thoughts. And I wasn't sure, if you would want to know my thoughts or not.
But I did.
And you did. And we had a phone call. And I shared with you, kind of some of the experiences that I had, and some of the concerns, that I had in ways that I thought that, things could be, improved. And, I remember, now some of those concerns and, there kind of were a number of things. But you really listened intently and asked a lot of questions, as I recall. Do you remember that conversation?
Well, not only do I remember that conversation, had I known you were going to pull up my original email, I could pull up that email that you sent me, because I asked you to document all of your thoughts after that call. And you did. You sent me a full page email of all the things that needed to be changed. And I have that email. And I promptly shared that email with our product development team and our training team. And we were beginning the launch of our 3rd edition of our nonviolent crisis intervention. I don't think you realized, well, I know you didn't realize that how profoundly seriously we took your comments. And the 3rd edition launched last July, and much of what you asked for is actually now in the program.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I mean, at the time, I don't think I had any idea that the comments I was providing would make any impact at all. I mean, I certainly appreciated that you were interested in the feedback, and I kind of felt like I'm happy to give the feedback. But from there, I wasn't really sure that, anything would become of it. Certainly, I didn't have any expectation that anything would become of it in the short term, because you and I had already talked. And at one point, there was this idea that, hey, later down the road, there might be an opportunity to provide input. And yet this 3rd edition was already well underway. So I'm sure when you began to share that with people, they're like, hey, we're trying to get a program out the door.
They're kind of used to that with me. So,
but I guess the truth is that, you really did take that input very seriously. And, there were a number of things that I recall kind of raising concerns about, being trauma informed and lacking brain science and, talking about one of the, I think the most profound things that struck me when I took the training was, a comment that somebody made when we went into physical skills that kind of stuck with me. And I had shared with you that, and shared with you that, I really felt like there was a opportunity and probably obligation that CPI might have to really let people know that when they use a hands-on intervention, it can lead to a tremendous impact. And the idea that these things can really cause significant trauma, and kind of reiterating that need to really have people understand that going hands-on really should be a last resort. And I know today, from having seen the training now, and how much you listened, and CPI listened to all that feedback and incorporated so much of it into what has now been 3rd edition of the Nonviolent Crisis Intervention training, which is fantastic.
Yeah, let me just talk about a couple things that we did that I think might be of interest. One, we reorganized the program so we focus on risk first, which was always at the end of the program, so that we can frame that restraint should be the last resort. So the whole first part of the program, which is all brand new, really focuses on restraint as a last resort, and that weaves through the entire program, and that's entirely new. Second, based on that, we introduced this whole series of lived experience videos, and we have parents and people who are restrained talking about the experience and the trauma of that. They're really, actually, we won an award. That filming won an award. But the one that resonates most is a mother who said, I can no longer hug my child because he was restrained and he cringes whenever I tried to hold him. And Guy, you and I were in a training together when a teacher actually was in tears in our training saying, I had no idea that the practices could have such a profound negative impact, and I'm ashamed of my early days as a teacher. So like, we know we're making a connection. The third thing is, you said, of course, people are going to think that this, I think the comment that when it was time for the physicals, they're like, oh, great, we're getting to the fun part now. And the fact that our old program, you had these like quiet table activities, and then you got up and exercised. From a neuroscience point of view, you're going to remember and have a positive experience because of that energy. And so we actually changed the program so there's more getting up and moving in the de-escalation part too, just to balance that. So
I remember that conversation. I remember that conversation. And the lived experience videos really are impactful. And the fact that is I mean, that is a significant part of the training, that everyone going through that new training will see these videos and really understand the impact of trauma that this can have. And I think that was so critical to kind of share that understanding. Of course, after we had our conversation, I didn't know that the wheels were turning and changes were being made. But what happened next kind of led to a point where I eventually did find out about that. And what happened next was, probably a few months down the road, a gentleman from CPI that had previously worked at CPI and had retired had come back to work with you on a special project. And his name was Marvin Mason. And Marvin was working on a project and reached out to me in what began probably the first of many phone calls. At the time that Marvin began reaching out, I had been through the training, provided feedback, appreciated the opportunity to provide feedback. Marvin began talking about a project that he was working on, and a project really related to, I think, kind of oversight, accountability. He was sharing with me that he had kind of run some pilots in providing CPI training to advocates and parents and attorneys so that they could kind of see what CPI training was and what it wasn't. And he began to kind of talk to me about potential of somehow partnering in doing that. And while I saw the value of that work, I was still very hesitant in terms of any kind of partnership. I didn't see it then, but I was also willing to continue to have conversations. And what happened over the course of several conversations was that I began to get to know Marvin a bit better. And as I knew Marvin a bit better, I learned some things about him that continued us kind of having conversations. I mean, one of which was that since he had retired, he was moving to Florida. He was planning to do some advocacy work as he retired. And he told me, and this was the game changer, he told me that his wife was an occupational therapist. And I joked with him that actually gave him more credibility. His wife is an amazing occupational therapist named Amy, who actually now is a volunteer with the Alliance. So that tells you how this story has taken some turns here. But Marvin and I continued having those conversations throughout the course of the summer. And, we kept kind of coming back to, is there potential to collaborate? And, at the time we had been developing some training around reducing, eliminating restraint and seclusion, which was a big project. We had a lot of things that we were working on. But I still was a little hesitant. I don't know that I saw initially kind of what that might look like or how we might collaborate. And I remember saying to Marvin one day, he says, like, what is it? What do you think? What do you think might present an opportunity? I said, if CPI were kind of willing to come out and say that they were aligned with the Alliance and eliminating seclusion and reducing restraint, I said, that'd be a really great starting point. And I remember he telling me that he had a conversation. I'd suggest that, hey, put out a press release and say this, would you be willing to do that? And he, went back and said he had a conversation with you, and you were like, well, yeah, of course, and then we then began talking about how we could collaborate without having, I think, initially, what that was going to look like. But it turns out that you had been doing a lot of your own research. When you said in the beginning that you had been watching some of our videos, it wasn't an exaggeration. You said that you had been kind of watching quite a few of those. What were you digging into at that time? Because this kind of set the stage for us to begin some really interesting conversations.
Yeah. So that's a good question. When I joined CPI, I think you said at the beginning, I joined 6 years ago. What I heard from customers is, oh, you're the restraint company. Some of our certified instructors would say, oh, I CPI'd that person. And the parent point of view was only from the perspective of, well, we had to restrain your child, but don't worry because we're CPI trained, so it's safe.
Right.
And nobody had any perspective about the de-escalation part or the 80% of our training that is about avoiding restraint. So that was sort of what set me on the mission. We introduced a little bit of neuroscience into the second edition of our program, and people loved it. And so we knew that we were onto something. And that's what led me to do more and more research on the neuroscience of behavior. In the third edition, we've added even more, and people love it. And so it's clear that people are very hungry for more of a neuroscience aligned approach to behavior. And that's what led me to you and to the podcast, because your speakers all are some of the biggest names in neuroscience, the neuroscience of behavior.
Mm-hmm. So, when we began to kind of move in that direction of looking at ways that we might collaborate, I think one of the things that was really important to me, and has always been really important to me, and I began to get it as I was having these mini conversations with Marvin and getting to know him, and then had a chance to get to know you. But to me, it wasn't just a matter of like doing something to work together because it could have a good outcome. It was a matter of doing it for the right reasons as well. And I began to get to know you kind of moving to the fall of that year. And we had a number of conversations, and I think I very excitedly was sharing with you kind of the things that I was excited about neuroscience, and about how do we go upstream, and how do we really look at kind of being preventative, really moving not just into de-escalation and crisis management, but how could we really move upstream. And I remember sharing with you kind of a lot of that passion around the brain science, and you then asked me if I would be willing to come and give a presentation, and
To CPI employees.
the CPI employees, right? And I was actually really excited about that. I thought, well, that's a fantastic opportunity. And I remember putting together the presentation, and I'm like, you giving me some direction. You wanted to see kind of some of the brain science that I've been talking about. And, I also kind of in that included some of my own commentary or thoughts about like, hey, what might be directions? Not that I was asked for that, but I figured, hey, it's my opportunity now. But, where might there be opportunities for CPI to move in a direction like that? And I remember that presentation, at least from the feedback I gathered, it was really positive. I got a lot of positive feedback from the team that we presented to. And that really led you and I down this, I think, the early road of talking about creating something new. So when we're to get into talking about this reframing behavior program that we're working on, but tell me, where did the seeds really begin there? Because I know what our journey looked like, but for you, when did you suddenly have this moment and think, we're going to do something different, we're going to do something really upstream?
I have to say it was influenced a lot by Ross Green. He and I spoke on a panel at COPA, I guess it was 2 years ago, and his approach is true prevention. And I say, well, we're the Crisis Prevention Institute. And we had this debate of, well, you're not true prevention because you start at the point where the crisis is at an early stage. And in order to be true prevention, you have to go upstream from that and really focus on how to prevent that crisis from ever getting to the anxiety level in the first place. So it was his influence combined with your influence, like these voices in my brain that said, okay, we've got to move. We really do need to move upstream. We need to create something that is very well aligned with the CPI de-escalation principles, which is the integrated experience that my behavior influences your behavior. Now in neuroscience terms, it's co-regulation, but the entire program is built on that. But we don't go and explain much beyond like fight, or fleas, the real neuroscience of behavior, how it impacts, the impact of co-regulation and positive behavior states, and what a profound difference that can make in outcomes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I remember when you and I first got together kind of in person to begin thinking about, because there was this idea of kind of creating a new program, a new course. And I remember getting together with you. And I remember one of the things that as we got together, you pulled up, you started pulling books out, and books that we talked about and recommended, and I began kind of seeing where you.
I pulled out those books because you recommended them in your podcast, and I read them.
Right. So you were beginning kind of your own journey into this kind of pathway, which we often talk about kind of here as like neuroscience informed and trauma informed neuroscience, related to neuroscience and collaboration and all these things. And then began this discussion of creating an entirely new program from the ground up. And we are at a point where we've been now working on that for, almost a year and a half now. And this program that started out as kind of, some conversations and, your idea. And I remember, being very, very much with you, like thinking that the prevention was where we needed to be. The upstream piece was always the word I'm using, is kind of, we need to go upstream, right? So I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about what this program is, and where it's going. So would you talk a little bit? I know there was a journey in kind of getting to where we are, but we've got this program that's really, I think, going to be fantastic. I'm just going to pause and let you kind of give the reframing behavior overview, if you would.
Sure. So it evolved from the time we started working together, which was about a year ago. And I have to now say that Connie Persick was heavily involved in the evolution of this. And I think probably more than anyone is responsible for where we are today in terms of making this really appropriate for teachers, because she's got the on-the-ground experience. But there's 4 elements to reframing behavior. The first is reframe your perspective, which is the introduction to neuroscience and the connection between the brain and nervous system and behavior. Emphasis on mental health and neurodiversity as part of that. The second is reframe your awareness. And there we really focus on the teachers and the staff members, because if you're yourself not regulated, you cannot regulate someone else. And what we see, and I'm sure what you see, is teachers in a dysregulated state often do the wrong things for the child, and it only leads to more of an escalation than need be. So we really focus on teacher wellness and practical strategies for helping teachers better cope and thrive in the environments that they're living in. There's a lot of research around teacher mental health, the issues facing staff shortages, burnout, all of that. So we felt we got to start with the teachers and help them so that they can help the kids in their, that they serve. I saw one of your comments about Robert Sapolsky. We actually do have a little section on why zebras don't get ulcers in the course. We cite a lot of the research of these famous researchers, but the importance of exercise and just movement, like shaking it out, the power that can have for helping you get to a more regulated state. So that's the awareness section. The next
and I'm going to pause real quick because you mentioned one of the Robert Sapolsky comments, and of course these are in the library of things that we're talking about as we're kind of going through and developing this. And he actually talks about kind of a lecture on behaviorism and how through the behaviorism lens, it's looking at human beings as a kind of input-output black box that operates only through reward and punishment. And of course the reframing behavior approach is really a lot different than that. A lot of what's happening in many schools around the country related to behavior. There's a lot of things that are happening that are consequences, that are rewards, that are kind of very driven from this idea that behavior is intentional. But this program is quite a bit different from that.
Very different. So yeah. I think what's going to be, because behaviorism is so, so much a part of school classroom management today, and PBIS. To me, it's interesting, and we've talked about this over time, how that will evolve, because you can't argue with the research on neuroscience and the connection between the brain, nervous system, and behavior. It's irrefutable. So at some point, this behaviorist movement is going to have to evolve to become more neuroscience aligned or informed. I just think it's going to take time because it's what people know, and it's the only thing they've been taught. And that's why it was so important for us to give them a different approach to show the power. Guy, I think one of the things you've repeated back to me is, I said to you, once I went through your neuroscience training, I can never look at behavior the same way. I look at it through a different lens, and we want to give every single person in K through 12 education the opportunity to see behavior through that different lens, because we think it's going to have a profound impact.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to sidetrack you there. But
that's okay. I love to talk about it. The third element is reframing your actions. And this is, if you are regulated, then you can, approach, assume it's a stress behavior, think can't, not won't, Be curious and ask questions, become a behavior detective, get to the underlying cause of the behavior and understand it so that you can prevent it. We also then talk about the language of positive, or the importance, the research behind positive language, and how thinking and using positive words can actually reframe how you approach a situation. And then the fourth element is reframing your relationships, all about the science of relationships. But I should also add that this is all designed to be very practical. So everything it's not like a bunch of research on neuroscience. It's how do you, once you understand these principles, how do you make little changes in your life and in your work that can make a lasting positive difference, because it's all based on neuroscience research.
And this, so, this really is about, how do we take that neuroscience? How do we take what we know about trauma, what we know about the brain? How do we then reshape not only our own thoughts around behavior, and including our own behavior as well as behavior of others, but then how do we act on that? And that's really reframing behavior. It's about kind of seeing behavior differently through that lens of neuroscience. And then, of course, when you see that, then your responses are different. And when your responses are different, we come to different outcomes. Because, kind of back to that point somebody made earlier, a lot of what we're doing today is not working. And the result of it not working is restraint, seclusion, suspension, expulsion, corporal punishment. It's a lot of punitive approaches that are leading, many kids down the wrong path, down like kind of a school to prison pipeline. And by changing what we're doing, we have so much influence to, ultimately, I think, create better classroom environments, not just for the kids, but for the teachers and staff, right? This is really about kind of culture change, changing kind of your mindset. And I know that you and I have big ideas about this, even beyond classrooms, but, kind of thinking about the classroom environment. One of the things I'd like you to hit on a little bit, this is considerably different than anything CPI has ever done before. This is not crisis training. Who is the program intended for? And thinking about our current program, who's it intended for? Who do you want to see taking this program? And then tell me how this is different, in terms of one of the things that I value about this is a lot is this is not just a one and done training program. So tell me a little bit about kind of the program as a whole, how it's implemented, what's part of the program, what it's going to look like, how we're going to move beyond that model of, okay, well, you did a half day PD and now need to have everything you need to know and you can change the world. How's this program different?
Exactly. So it's different in every possible way from the core CPI trainings. First, it is a different, it doesn't talk about the crisis development model. There's nowhere in the program where we talk about how to deal with a crisis. It's all about preventing anything from happening and positive behavior support. We are intending it, our honest to God, our mission is for every person who is involved in a school to have access to this content and this material. So unlike the core CPI programs where we sell certified instructor training programs and then materials, this is a one fee subscription for a school. And it's going to be between probably about on average $2,000 per school per year. It's an annual subscription. But with that, unlimited access for unlimited staff members and for the life of that subscription. So we want people we're creating a professional development day, which we're calling a launch day rather than a training day, because we want this to be the beginning of a journey that lasts through the school year and then through the next school year and then the next. Included in the price is the training of a facilitator for every school, because we want to make sure there's somebody on the ground who's helping to promote and reinforce these principles and helping people along on their journey. Connie Persek actually is creating professional learning community activities so that people who use professional learning communities in their schools now can adapt them to incorporate practices and applications from the reframing behavior, so that it becomes part of the culture and the everyday. And one of those is actually the capstone is for a teacher to come to a group of teachers in the professional learning community and say, I've got this kiddo and he's showing these behaviors, and walking through the rubric of neuroscience to say, how do we get to the bottom of this and prevent it from happening? Because I think so many teachers feel isolated, and there's so much support just in their school building if everybody had a common framework and, could support each other using a common approach and a common language. So that's in a nutshell what this is. And then we hope to continue. We actually want to measure outcomes from the beginning of this journey through, to measure the impact on behavior incidents in a school and tie that to the engagement of a school around this approach.
Yeah, the word I always come back to is like ecosystem. I mean, this is, again, it's not just the course and you're done with the course and you check a box, but you're really trying to kind of create a change in culture, a change in practice, a change in mindset. And, unlike, kind of the crisis management programs, kind of in the tiered language that schools use, like this is a tier 1, this is for everybody. When you said everybody, I know you and I have had this conversation before, the hope here is that bus drivers are trained in reframing behavior, that folks that work in the cafeteria are trained in reframing behavior. It's really trying to help bring about a systemic change, not just a change for those children or the children that have, frequent discipline. This is really about kind of changing the mindset for everybody, and I think changing culture as well. I want to pause for a second and just look at some of the comments and questions here and bring a couple of up. Just otherwise, I will continue to monopolize all the time here. I did mention to you when we started that we tend to have a global audience, and Marion helped me to stay honest here, listening from Australia. And of course, it is Friday morning, probably around 8:11 in the morning in Australia. So up early to join us here. Let me see some of the comments here. Will there be testing to measure the numbers of restraints used in version 2 versus version 3 of training? So this is, Kessa brought this up.
CPI questions, yeah.
Yep. Related to NVCI. And
I wish there were. Some schools are doing that, but it all depends on the fidelity of the training. So we present this training. We have recommendations for how it should be implemented, but whether or not it's implemented with fidelity and whether or not they're spending enough time on de-escalation, those are really important factors. So we know schools who are using the second edition of our training and have almost no restraints. And we know schools who have a huge number of restraints. And, it's usually a few schools and a few teachers and a few, unfortunately, a few kids who really, bear the brunt of that. So no, there isn't testing to measure the number of restraints versus version 2 or version 3, because there's so many different variables. But with this new program, we do want to measure the decrease of behavior influence, or even actually workers' comp claims, with depending on the usage. So the other difference here is because it's a subscription-based product with a library that people can access, we'll be able to actually see usage in a way that we can't with a one and done training, which is really what our core programs are about. Another way this is very different.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'm going to get to a couple more questions here. So Cass said, what is CPI doing to get this out to everyone that already trained under CPI without this update? So just to be clear, Cass, it's not necessarily an update. It's an entirely different program. But I think what you're getting at is just this desire to see anybody that's been trained in any kind of crisis intervention to see this. So Susan, what's your thought on that? I mean, certainly you've got a customer base that will be customers that you're reaching out to get this program. But this program really goes beyond even your current customer base into schools that maybe you weren't working. Tell us a little bit more about that, how you...
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I guess the words ethical responsibility, that assumes that what we were doing before is unethical. And I think that just as we started this program, CPI training is very mission-driven, very, very ethically driven. We're a very mission-driven company, and our mission is to reduce and eliminate restraint. and never to allow seclusion. So I want to get that out there. Once that training is done, and we make people come back every 2 years and we make them document their training so we can see what they're actually doing, but we can't see what they do day to day, and we can't see whether they're training the right people in the right ways. And that's one of the limitations of classroom training. So we want people to understand that there's much more to this than even de-escalation techniques. There's a whole body of science about how to create true positive behavior supports. But I don't acknowledge that our current training or our former trainings were unethical. The use of it, the implementation of it might have been. There's all sorts of variables for that too. So, we don't really stand in judgment. We're here to help and to get people on a journey. And this is the next chapter on that journey for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to add to that, I think, since we've been collaborating together, you mentioned kind of seclusion. CPI has not supported seclusion. Well before we collaborated, CPI was actually involved in efforts to ban seclusion. There was a legislation in Florida before the legislation that passed several years ago, and CPI was actually part of that. But since we've been working together, you've been there in supporting legislative changes that are aimed at eliminating seclusion and reducing restraint. So I know that you're doing a lot of that work. And, again, I know that, having been on this journey, how aligned we are in this idea of, really, again, I go back to that first email you sent me about, hopefully one day eliminating these things altogether. But it is certainly a journey, and I think we're making some significant progress. Cassie asked a question kind of related to seclusion, and said, "Is there any explicit information in the version 3 training about never using seclusion?" And I think I know the answer to that, but
I think I actually can't answer that 100% truthfully because I don't know. I know in our program, we never talk about seclusion. It's not any part of any training that we deliver. And with this emphasis up front on risk and, just the kind of the risk pyramid, it's restraint as a last resort. We don't talk about seclusion, but I think we make the assumption that seclusion is out of the question. Now, I think, again, there's so much gray with these areas, and it's one of our challenges that, how do you define seclusion? In the legislation is defined a certain way, and then people tend to stretch it. Is putting someone in a timeout room where they can get out of the room is okay, but locking them behind closed doors is never okay. I think what we see is every district and every school has kind of their own interpretation. Right. We can only help people move on the journey. And when they do get into trouble, and thank heavens for the Department of Justice taking a much closer view of this, and for states taking more legislative action, because it's going to force people to do the right thing. And it's so obvious when something goes wrong, what they could have done differently. And we come in and point out what they should have done differently. And it's always a case of, I didn't know what I didn't know, or mostly that there's not enough leadership involvement or oversight over what's actually happening in the schools. So one of the other things about this is we want to sell to districts and make this engage leadership in the power of this approach, because it will trickle down in a way that the check the box restraint, the safe restraint training just doesn't today.
Right. Yeah. I mean, culture and training, it really does come down to that, and leadership is critical. When I have an opportunity, not only with my own experience, but kind of in the experience of others in our community, to look at, data where you see there are places where these things happen excessively. There are places where these things are being done a lot. And very often it's a very punitive culture. We find that, I think one of the challenges here is that very often people, that are taking the training, they take the CPI training, they go back to their district. And in addition to teaching CPI, they're teaching whatever other things they may be doing. So for instance, if the district allows the use of seclusion, they often are teaching that alongside of the CPI. And what I've found is that people basically begin to think, well, that's part of the CPI training. We learn seclusion in our CPI training, when in fact it was just part of that district's individual training that wasn't necessarily really clear that it wasn't part of the CPI training. So we see cases where those kinds of things happen, where what people are doing may not actually be aligned with the training. And we also see that there's individual differences in how people look at and approach what their laws say. What I've found is there's often an issue with people even knowing what their state law says when it comes to restraint and seclusion, and really understanding what that means. Let me go through a couple more things here. Let's see what else we have. Okay, so I want to, look, we've got somebody here from Ireland as well. That's great. So I did want to talk a little bit more about reframing behavior. I want to talk about the library. So again, subscription, not one and done, kind of an initial kind of kickoff training. And then there is the professional learning communities, which Connie has been working to develop, so that they're kind of continuing to bring that to the staff. Talk about the library. What's that? There's a library, and that's different than other things you've done.
We want to design the intro. Those 4 elements are 4 modules of an online course, but they are also 4 different sets of micro learnings. So we designed them so that they could be played as a course for this launch event, but also could be consumed in small doses. And the idea is that this library is available after the training. Even if you don't have the training, the library is available, and you can browse and understand and be exposed to these principles, and mostly the practices that are associated with them, in an ongoing way. We are also filming videos of what good looks like. Based on customer feedback, we know that teachers wanted to see models of the right approaches with a student. So actually last weekend, we filmed in Chicago the What Good Looks Like videos. We have a whole set of lived experience videos that we filmed as well, just what it feels to have a mental illness, or what it feels like to be dysregulated from a teacher and student perspective. So that's part of it. And then we're doing a series of deeper dives, articles and book reviews of these, the popular literature, so people could get a quick, summary. We'll expand that over time based on what customers, what teachers and administrators want to see added. We already know that there's been many requests for resources for parents. So down the road, we will develop that for sure, because that's just a huge request. And probably multiple languages. There's already been requests for Spanish or French versions of this too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting. You talk about resources for parents, and you and I have talked about kind of the broader applicability of this approach and what's being brought forward into life with this program. And there's so much more potential here, and very much, I think, for parents being able to kind of bring, some of the neuroscience of, behavior into what you're doing. I mean, I had the same revelation that you had at some point, where it was kind of like when you begin to see behavior differently, when you begin not to look at behavior as something intentional that people are doing, but you begin to understand that a lot of behavior is in fact not intentional. A lot of behavior is a stress response. It's bottom up. When you begin to understand, that, it really changes everything. Because if you're looking at someone's behavior through a lens of intent, your response is, okay, how do I change what they're doing? They're making this choice. So what do I do to change that? I either do something to them or offer something for them. I try to bribe them. Out of behavior. And when you understand that so much of behavior is really kind of it's coming from our brain and our nervous system and coming from our bodies, when you begin to understand how fundamental safety is and feeling safe is to how someone might respond, when you begin to understand how trauma and disability affect these things, it really changes your approach. And I agree. I'm excited about the potential of bringing more of this. And I think about, again, this is built off of a lot of amazing work. You mentioned some of it, but, people like Mona Delahooke and, Stuart Shanker and Ross Green, and, the list can go on of people that have been doing just amazing work. And this is really kind of bringing a lot of that together in something that can be applied and help to bring about change in our schools. So it's really exciting from that perspective. Do you see this in the long term, going into other areas of the CPI, of course, works in schools, but you work in other areas as well?
Yeah, we work in healthcare and human services, and we've already had requests for it. I just want to make sure we're doing right by teachers and that audience, because it's chaotic. Somebody needs to do something to help the teachers and the kids. And so we're really focusing on doing that right first. But we know that, it's true. I say this about CPI training too. Everybody in the world needs these life skills. And I think it's even more true with this understanding. So there's so many best-selling books that are on the New York Times bestseller list: Gentle Parenting, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. So many best-selling books, but only available to a small, the more literate reading population who are buying and digesting all of those books. And we want to make this available to everybody with the basics that they need to understand, to really reframe their lens on behavior. That's the goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And of course, reframing behavior. It starts with us. It starts with the adult. But all too often, much of the traditional approach is really focused on, the child that, has the least experience, the least developed brain, the least, but we put everything on a child, including the intent.
We do. And I think the problem with that is we overlook the needs of the teachers, and we overlook the stress that they're under too. And we expect them to provide all these perfect solutions when they're a dysregulated, mess half the time. And they will tell you that they're what I've learned working at CPI is about people with the duty to care is they spend all of their energy giving to other people and trying to support other people, and they have no energy left for themselves. And at the end of the day, they just want to go home and watch TV and eat a bag of potato chips because they don't have energy for anything else. We get that, and we understand it, and we want to sort of introduce little things like, okay, you don't have to take a mindfulness class. You don't have to go to yoga. You don't even have to go to the gym. We're teaching you, a 30-second breathing exercise that will impact your neuroscience. So, there's a lot of wellness stuff about, you should drink 8 glasses of water a day. But if you drink few sips of water from a neurological perspective, it can help you. So, we want to build little habits, not major life-changing ones.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And talk to me too. I know the answer in part to this question, but there was a lot of effort to get feedback from educators and to get administrators and teachers and others involved in the process. Can you talk a little bit about how, as we went through this, we made opportunities and have look for ways to support educators?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it started actually, Ginger will attest to this, at the Trauma Sensitive Schools Conference last year. We held focus groups of conference attendees who were involved in education to get their insight on a very basic approach that we were considering toward this. But the idea of doing a program like this, overwhelming support. We then built a panel, a voice of customer panel of, I think it's about 70 people around the country who are now engaged in helping us fine tune what's in the program, the research we should cover, what they were involved in, what should be in this learning library. We're giving them sort of behind the scenes views of this program as it develops. But it is, and as part of that, I did, I think, like 6 focus groups of teachers and tested different concepts to see what would resonate. So from my publishing days, especially in textbook publishing, you're never done. And Guy and I, we've talked about this. this first launch is just the beginning. When you put a product into the market or a program into the market, then you really get feedback to fine tune it. That's why we were on the third edition of our crisis intervention, our nonviolent crisis intervention program. We will continue to evolve and improve this. But to me, the best market research happens after you launch the program and you really live with your customers and understand what's working and what's not.
Absolutely. So I guess a couple of things. One, again, this is a pretty big deal, I think, in terms of, CPI, of course, has their core products, and this is an entirely new program. I mean, you don't just create programs like this every day, right? So it's a pretty big deal in terms of this this initiative, and I know that you have a lot of let me just say, I mean, I know you have really high hopes for what's going to come out of this. What are your hopes? What do you hope to see with this program?
Well, I'm going to sound corny here, but I'm being genuine here. So when you started and talked about my bio, I think that if the audience came away with anything, it's, wow, she's been around a long time. A lot of different jobs over a lot of different years. And this is honest to God, the truth. I believe I was brought to CPI, which, by the way, when I joined CPI, I moved from New York to Milwaukee. My husband is still in New York, happily employed. We're still happily married, but I felt so strongly about the mission of CPI that I moved here. And this evolution and where we are, I really do believe it's like, honestly, what I was put on earth to do. And I want to make sure that we really realize the potential and the opportunity to give people hope. Teachers more hope, kids more hope, school districts more positive cultures. And, this is a baby step, and it will probably take another 40 years for CPI to fully realize that. But I think it's just such an important product for the world to have.
You and I've had this conversation before, and I know well, kind of your thoughts and feelings behind it, and I too see the potential. I mean, I think that looking through the lens that this program is bringing to schools, it really is hopeful. I mean, when you can focus on helping people to feel safe, understanding why things are difficult for us at times, for all of us, I really think you can make the world a better place. So much of what happens that is undesirable in the world, even on a larger context, is due to stress and stress responses. And again, as you begin to look at the world through a different lens, it really can help. I mean, even in, I think about my own personal experiences, and if you have anything you want to share, you can. But as you've been doing this, because first of all, I remember when you joined when we were at the ATN conference, the Creating Trauma Sensitive Schools conference last year, and you were there, and the gentleman running the focus groups was kind of talking about what a significant thing it is that you're there, and how involved you have been in this process. David said something effective like, she could delegate people to be here. This has been something that you have been involved with every step of the way. In fact, we've had a very small focus team for the better part of a year that has been working on this, and this is really something that again, this isn't just an idea you had and you set people off. You've been doing this. You've been leading this. So I know it's really really meaningful to you, and the investment that you've made in it. Really probably reflects kind of what you, what you're hoping to get out of it. I remember you explaining to me early on how you kind of saw this as almost a capstone on your career, in terms of what you wanted to accomplish. So, I mean, it's fantastic. And I think says a lot about, what we're trying to do here with this program.
Not much pressure. Now now I have to deliver something that is worthy of this hype, but I really do think it's ground. I mean, as we see it develop, and I think I speak for you and Connie, as we're actually seeing this develop, it's like, wow, this is really great. It's really needed, and it's really coming together in such an important way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking, I think we scheduled this many, many, many months ago, because we're scheduling like a year in advance now for our live events. So I think you and I scheduled this quite some time ago. And as we've been talking about it, I'm like, what we're gonna have to do? We're gonna have to do a kickoff event, and we've got to have Connie here too, for our kickoff event to talk a little bit more about this. But it is exciting. I mean, I think the for the journey that we've been on, kind of, initially, I had a lot of concern about any potential collaboration, and realized the point that by collaborating together, we have an opportunity to see a program that can really go upstream and make a tremendous difference, brought into many schools around the country. And I think there's so much positive potential here to get this program out and really to be affecting some positive change.
Positive change for children, certainly, also for teachers and even for parents, because one of the things that we've talked a lot about is teachers have to understand their own biology, and that they might be in a fight, flight, or freeze state. And they got to give themselves grace, because we all have those dysregulated moments and get out of our window of tolerance. We can learn from it, and we should constantly strive to do better, but nobody's perfect here. And, the kiddos are having challenging behaviors. We have challenging behaviors, and we're all on this journey together. And we're all grounded by these basics of the brain and the nervous system, and understanding and evolving to really get brain aligned for the best positive outcome.
Mm-hmm. So your comment really corresponded well to a comment here that was just coming in, and said also for all those who support adults right now and in the future, agencies can employ enough support workers to care for adults. Also can be open to change their policies. That's all relevant for our adults too.
100%.
Yep, absolutely. So if you're watching live, if you have any final questions or comments, feel free to put those in the chat. We're gonna be winding up here in just a minute, but I want to give you one last chance, if you have any questions, to put those in the chat. So Susan, I want to ask you a question here in terms of this journey. What has surprised you on this journey, or what has been one of the more notable things that, because this really has been a journey. I mean, I remember kind of the early meetings that we were having talking about this, and we would have a meeting, we'd shift a little, and then we'd kind of this has really been a process, but it's all to that goal of how can we bring this information to people where it can really make a tremendous difference. So what about this journey has been really just interesting or surprising to you?
Well, Guy, I had to laugh at that last comment, because you like to take time to think things through, and I'm like, okay, we're going to do this today. And usually I get on a call, and if we have calls every Friday morning, Guy and Connie and I and our instructional designer, and I've always got like some great new idea that makes Guy's head spin. But we work through it, and I think we're a great combo, because you're much more grounded and I'm much more, let's go there. So I think together with Connie's support, we've really developed something that works. I think the biggest thing for me is the overwhelming interest in this program. I mean, in our focus groups, in Guy and Lori DeSaltos and I did an Ed Week webinar a year ago, and there were an incredible number of people who registered for this on a Friday afternoon, because there's such an interest in the neuroscience of behavior and how to apply it to classrooms. And there's such a dearth of training or, practical application of it for schools. And I think that's made me really driven to get this to market as quickly as we can, because there's such a need for it. And I knew we were onto something, but I had no idea that there would be this much interest in it.
One of my personal, what's the right word here? I want to say hero, but one of my personal heroes, my heroes have changed since I was little, but Dr. Stuart Shanker and the work that he does through the Merit Center and Self-Reg and all of his work. But he says something that I think is so profound, which is, if you see a child differently, you see a different child. And this program, kind of Reframing Behavior, is all about how do we see people differently? and when you see people differently, you see different people, and there's so much, I think, hope in that, hope for positive change, and that's certainly, I think, what we both hope to see come out of this. So we have a lot of in our audience, we have a lot of families, parents, teachers, administrators, related professionals, lots of people from different areas and different kind of interests in what we're doing. But if somebody's interested, well, tell us a little bit more. Tell us when is the program launching? When will people be able to get the program? When will people be able to learn more and potentially, if they're interested in getting into a school, what are the options going to look like for that?
Yeah, so the program, we'll start to really market the program in March. The program will be available for use at the end of June. And we assume that most of the actual usage would happen at professional development days in July, August, and September, which is aligned with the school year, and then carry forward into the next year. If people are in, I think the best for this audience is if people want to learn more, make Guy aware of it. And Guy and I talk multiple times a week, and so we'll make sure that we're coordinated and getting people the information they need. I know there's a need for this sort of training for parents. That's not on our roadmap for at least this first year, but like I said, we have to develop resources for parents, and we can make those available too.
Yeah, and such a powerful opportunity kind of down the road, because I think that as we can help make shifts through kind of a neuroscience aligned lens to schools, the more we can do to support similar approaches in homes and in families, I think the better. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity there. And we have a question here. Is this available in Australia?
Well, funny you should ask, because I do think there's a big market in Australia, and I would love to talk to you more about that. So let's follow up after this. If you just send Guy your contact information, or maybe you do, I'll follow up, because I actually do think there's a big opportunity with what I've studied around funding and legislation in Australia. I think it's very aligned.
Great. All right. So we're just about here wrapping up, but I want to give you an opportunity, Susan. Any final words you want to share? Or it's been great to be able to talk with you about this. Yeah. And of course, we've been collaborating now for some time, and I really feel so positive about what we're creating here and its potential, again, to get upstream and to lead to changes that can really change outcomes. I think, being proactive, moving upstream, moving away from reacting to, how do we better support individuals? And this is really kind of aimed in that direction, kind of through that neuroscience, trauma-informed lens, which is really going to make a positive difference. So I appreciate your, I appreciate you, I'll just say that, and the work that you've been doing to bring this to life. And let me just give you any final opportunity to share.
No, I think I've shared it all along. I am probably the number one member of your fan club. The fact that we're doing this and that CPI is launching it is because of you and the work that you had been doing. And so we were on these parallel journeys, and I think it's just great that we're working together on this. And I would say to the audience that you keep me honest every day. So anytime there's new legislation, Guy reaches out to me and says, okay, you got to testify. And I do. And it's been such a learning experience to see these various perspectives and try to figure out how to balance them for the best outcome. So I'm very grateful for the collaboration. I'm very grateful that you answered that email when you did. And I'm just really looking forward to where this takes us.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I did want to add just one other thing as you said that, again, having the opportunity to collaborate with you, not just on this project, but on a number of other issues, concerns, whether it be legislative or otherwise. One of the other things that I know is, and if you're a parent or you're a family member and you're aware of situations that CPI has, the nonviolent crisis intervention training has been used in a way that it shouldn't. I know that I've shared with you before concerns that have been shared with me, and that CPI has really done, I think, work to, you don't want to see CPI being used inappropriately any more than anyone else does, probably even lesser than anyone else.
Well, for sure. And we welcome that. If we welcome those, cases, if somebody is misusing it, or if, there's inappropriate use, we do follow up, we do engage with the school, because, it's not good for anybody. And at the end of the day, it's not good for the school.
Absolutely. Yep. And I just wanted to make that point because, I know there've been a number of situations that, I've mentioned to you and that you've been very responsive to. So, if you are a parent, or if you, are aware of situations that you're concerned about, always reach out to me, and I'm happy to connect with CPI as well on these concerns. This has been great. I really appreciate you spending the last hour and 15 minutes with me here. I know you've got a lot to do. I know we've got a lot to do actually together. We're both going to be going to Dallas in, a little over a week, and actually doing a session about this as a pre-conference session. And I'm going to be talking a little bit in my session at the conference as well about reframing behavior. So we've actually got a lot of work still to do. So we better go ahead and cut this short.
Let me just say one quick plug to tie this all together. Supportable Solutions and Connie's work is so aligned with all of this. So the Y Toolkit is completely aligned because she's aligned with us. But I think it's very complementary. So anybody considering that, slowly we're going to take over the world with our neuroscience aligned approaches.
Absolutely. Yeah. And of course, Connie now is one of our sponsors for the podcast. And, I'm lucky enough to call her a friend and colleague, and, just is doing amazing work, and has been such an important part of this effort to bring this to life. So anyway, I will let you go, Susan, and you can hang on for 1 second. We'll let everybody else go first. But thank you again for joining us. We will be back. I think we're going to be back for a special program next week, if I'm not mistaken. And we will see you again real soon. Thanks.